Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the second quarter of my PlayStation 1 1998 retrospective. A huge year and a lot to go through this quarter. 17 different really notable games you should check out for the PS1. Let's get right to it. First up is Klonoa, Door to Phantomile. This is the first game in the Cult series and one of the first 2.5D platformers. The game has a focus on story with some surprising plot points in which Klonoa and Hupao, his ring spirit companion, tried to save their dream world from the invader Gadius. There's a lot of cutscenes throughout the game telling the story. Gameplay has the player moving Klonoa and capturing enemies with Hupao in order to use them as projectile attacks or to jump higher. The game features 13 stages and 7 bosses. There's also 72 prisoners to collect, which unlock a special stage when found. A crazy fact about this game is it started development as a title based on the Spriggan manga, but that changed to an original character and world when they couldn't finalize the licensing deal. If you know that manga or anime, it's pretty surprising. Door to Phantomile was remade for the Wii and recently was released alongside its sequel for current-gen consoles. Theme Hospital is next. A really fun and comical hospital sim from the creators of Theme Park. You manage a hospital where you help patients while balancing the books and keeping the place sanitary. The game is set up with a number of challenges where you manage a hospital for a time before completing it and moving on to a larger one. It's worth checking into if you're into simulation titles. Then we get Blasto, a first-party, third-person, 3D action platformer that was known for its difficulty compared to other ones of the genre. The game stars Captain Blasto, who is notably voiced by actor Phil Hartman. He tries to stop the alien boss from taking over the solar system. The game has a player running, jumping, and shooting through the stages. There are various weapons and power-ups that can be found, and Blasto can also swim and use a jetpack. Controls supported the DualShock controller, which make the game much easier to control by using a second stick to aim. A big fighter next, Tekken 3. This is another step forward for the series after the very successful Tekken 2, and considered one of the best fighting games of this era by many. The game introduced 13 new characters, most notably are the kids of existing characters like Jin, Julia, and Forrest, as well as the new boss Ogre, and new novelty characters like Dinosaur, Panda, and the Training Dummy. Gameplay is similar to the previous game, but with much more of a focus on the 3D gameplay using sidestepping. The console version was the first fighting game notable for providing a ton of unique extra modes, including a side-scrolling beat-em-up mode called Tekken Force and Tekken Ball, a volleyball mode where the player hits the ball using their attacks. A Capcom RPG, Breath of Fire 3. This is the third game in Capcom's fantasy RPG series, which focuses on a near-extinct race which are like humans but can transform into dragons. The game stars Ryu, a member of that race who's found in the mines and escapes joining a group of outcasts before getting wrapped up in a story surrounding the history of the dragons. The game uses 3D models and an isometric viewpoint along with 2D character sprites. It also features a highly regarded jazzy soundtrack and voice acting. The gameplay is standard JRPG with a world map, towns, dungeons, and random encounters using a turn-based 3-character party combat system. Hot Shots Golf is next. The game's also known as Everybody's Golf in its latest iterations and overseas. Surprisingly, from the developers of the Shining Force series, this was a really notable golf game for the time. It took that standard golf gameplay and mixed it with a fun, cute art style. The game features 6 courses and a number of standard modes, as well as a mini golf course, which is pretty surprising because I don't think many of the later titles had that. Most notably, the developers went on to create Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. A cool arcade port I wouldn't have expected, Point Blank. This is a console version of the really fun gallery light gun shooter that was in a ton of arcades at the time. The GunCon controller simulated the arcade experience. It's got a ton of carnival-style minigames. A really surprising and interesting addition to the home release was an RPG mode, where you shoot around a world map to move the characters and get into random encounters. The battles have you shooting the enemies, and the story has you exploring the world completing objectives. Next up is Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. The second game in the Ogre series, following Ogre Battle, changes up the gameplay from a more traditional strategy title to a tactic-style SRPG, with turn-based units moving around and attacking on isometric maps. The game has a player joining a liberation army to bring peace back to a kingdom swept up in a brutal civil war after the royal family dies out. The game has a big cult following now and is praised for its gameplay and story. The game was designed by Yasumi Matsuno, who went on to create Final Fantasy Tactics, so it's no wonder that there's so many similarities between the two. It's also been re-released on PSP, and a new update to that version is coming out soon for current-gen consoles. Following that, we get Einhander, a 2.5D horizontal shoot-'em-up in which the player controls a fighter ship in a war between the Earth and the Moon. The game focuses on a single-player experience with no two-player mode. There are 3 different ships to choose from, as well as 2 unlockable extra ships. The ships differ in its basic guns and how many gun pods they can hold and equip. Different weapons are available by picking up gun pods in the stages. The game features 7 stages, each with 2 bosses. Following that, the huge racing game of the time, Gran Turismo. This is the beginning of Sony's legendary sim racing series that gave players a ton of content for beginners with enough depth for the most hardcore racing fans. The game features 2 modes. The arcade mode was a traditional racer experience where you complete races to unlock new cars and courses, and the simulation mode had you earning and upgrading your licenses and participating in events to earn cash and buy new cars. You could also tune the cars that you owned. There were 11 courses, as well as mirrored versions of each, and 140 cars. If you're not into racing games, it's hard to describe what a big deal this was. The series is still known for being that high level of racing sim, so definitely an interesting start to that. Yeah, another racing game after that, Road Rash 3D. This is the 4th game in the motorcycle series. It brings the racing and combat the series is known for to a new 3D engine. The game features 12 bikes, 4 rival gangs, and a connected world, including different environments that have different starting and ending points for the courses. The overall racing mechanics were improved, but the combat aspects of the original game were less of a focus, which took away a lot of what made the original game stand out. This was the last game in the series developed by EA. A conversion of a big arcade fighting game, X-Men vs. Street Fighter. The console port of the massively popular arcade fighting game that follows up on X-Men Children of the Atom comes to PlayStation. The game is a 6-button 2D fighter in which 17 playable characters from Street Fighter and X-Men take on Apocalypse. In North America, this was the only console port of the game we got, even though the notable Japanese Saturn version made use of the RAM expansion and is considered a much better experience. The biggest letdown for Capcom vs. fans is that the game is a watered-down version of the tag team fighting the arcade version is known for. You can call in your partners for supers and assists, but you can't really switch to them. You're basically fighting one-on-one like other fighters of the time. Basically, with the way they decided to port the game, the PS1 couldn't support 2-on-2 fights by keeping all of those sprites in memory. There is a secret mode where you can play 2-on-2, but only if both teams use the same character. Next up, a title that became way more notable long after the fact, Shadow Tower. This was a pretty obscure first-person RPG at the time, but it's now well known for being one of the precursors to the Soul series. Shadow Tower is a game by the creators of Kingsfield and definitely feels inspired by the previous 2 Kingsfield games. It uses a similar engine to those 2. The game has the player controlling a mercenary who's returned to his hometown to find it dragged down into the underworld by demons. He sets off to explore 7 lands in order to defeat the Demon King and save the townsfolk. While the game may seem similar to those other games at first, there's quite a bit that differentiates it. First off, it has much more of a horror atmosphere. The leveling system is also quite unique, where you increase stats by defeating different types of monsters. There are 150 different monsters, and basically killing the same monster twice won't increase your stats. There's also a ton of gear and weapons dropped by the enemies or found in the stages, so you can constantly change up your loadout. The equipment has durability and can break, which is a frustrating feature of games in my opinion. Combat is what you'd expect from a FromSoft RPG. There's a stamina-like system where your attacks are useless if you attack too often and the stamina bar is low. You can also cast spells and use items. A big addition is the shield, which now you can block attacks and take reduced damage with. Like King's Field, it's a very cool precursor to the Souls game that's worth checking out, even though it can be quite tricky to navigate. Next up, Elemental Gearbolt. A light gun shooter with an anime aesthetic and a sci-fi setting that's pretty unique for the genre. The game is kind of a spin-off of the Castle Shikigami series and stars the character Tagami, who was a secret character in the first Castle Shikigami game. The game was localized here as Mobile Light Force with quite a few changes though, so don't expect to get the story from there. The game has the character traveling to the past of a world to investigate what caused the world's downfall throughout the game's 6 stages. Gameplay is what you'd expect from a light gun shooter, moving your cursor and shooting. There are 3 different weapons, fire, lightning, and water type weapons, which each handle differently and have different advantages. At the end of each stage, the player can use points earned to upgrade their stats, adding some character progression to the gameplay. The game also has light gun support, so it's ideal to play with a PS1 gun con if you have that and the CRT that'll support it. Next up is Grand Theft Auto. The first iteration of the GTA series is very different from what people think of the series now, but it's got all the core mechanics that would inspire the 3D iterations to come. With a top-down perspective and tank control character movement, you can steal cars and use guns to down enemies or innocent bystanders in order to complete missions you get from payphones, all while avoiding the increasing police presence. The objective is to obtain a certain amount of points to move on to the next level. The game includes 3 cities with 2 levels each. You've got Liberty City, San Andreas, and Vice City. Those should be pretty recognizable to GTA fans. The game is pretty tough with the high points count needed to complete each level. Definitely worth checking out just to see where this series started, though it may be a bit tricky to play for a lot of people. Yeah, an interesting RPG next, the Granstream Saga. I don't think that's quite how you say it, based on the pronunciation in the game, Gangstrom. I'm not 100% sure on that. This is one of the first fully 3D RPGs. It's an action RPG that's considered the spiritual successor to Quintet's SNES RPGs, which include Soul Blazer, Illusions of Gaia, and Terranigma. The game takes place in a world that's been falling into the sea, and the remaining floating land is just down to a few small continents. The game stars Eon. Him and his mentor cut away the land on their continent in order to keep it in the air. When he awakens a mysterious power, it sends him on a journey to save the world. Gameplay is mostly like a top-down RPG for exploration, but the 3D nature allows for different camera angles to give the game a lot of personality. The unique art style can be a bit jarring, but overall holds up pretty well and definitely looks different to many other JRPGs of the time. The battling system is also unique. Instead of being able to attack freely like most action RPGs, the game's combat system is made up of one-on-one duels that change up the camera and controls when an enemy is encountered. Eon can attack, block with his shield, and use spells and items. There's also a number of different weapon types that mix it up. The last game for the year is Tomba. This is a 2D cult platformer by an ex-Capcom producer who started his own company after working on a ton of beloved SNES and NES titles. The game stars the caveman-like kid Tomba, who explores the island in order to reclaim his grandfather's bracelet from an army of pigs. The game uses a CGI rotoscoped visual style similar to Donkey Kong Country, but with a much more complex level design and arrangement. The game has an open world with a ton of events that can randomly happen throughout it to mix things up a bit. The levels have multiple paths, allowing Tomba to traverse through the backgrounds and foregrounds to collect different items and get to different areas. There's also an element of puzzle solving where you can use items found to overcome different challenges. The gameplay is also fairly unique from traditional platformers in how Tomba jumps, attacks, and interacts with enemies and the environment. While it might look like just another platformer on the surface, it's worth checking out to see the unique spin the game puts on the genre. And that's it for this quarter. Hopefully you learned about some new games, and we'll get to the rest of the quarter soon. Check out my other retrospectives, like and subscribe and all that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
It's appreciation time! Reward Mike's hard work by subscribing. Otherwise, we might see you in the next class trial.